Thank you, Paul. That is a succinct account of what we have done all these years and what we are looking ahead to. We are most delighted to hear loud and clear the government's firm commitment on Harbourfront enhancement from both the Financial Secretary and the Secretary of Development. And we believe that the vision to create an attractive and vibrant Victoria Harbourfront, of which we and our future generations could all be proud of, and is shared among all of us. To realize our common vision, we need you and all members of the community to take part. Now, this brings us to first dialogue this morning. Turning challenges into opportunities. Some say great opportunities come to all, but many do not know they have met them. Today we have invited speakers from Auckland and Vancouver who are going to tell us how challenges could become catalysts and create opportunities for harbourfront development or revitalization and longer-term harbourfront planning for their cities. Ladies and gentlemen, before inviting the first speaker on stage, let me briefly introduce how each dialogue works. First, our overseas speaker will each present the city's story, and then followed by an interactive discussion to be moderated by one of our members of the core group of Harbourfront Commission. Our speakers will also take some questions from the floor in each dialogue session. As you can see, we have 600 audience today, and with a rather big hall here, to handle questions more systematically, you do not need to put up your hands. So what you need to do is to put down your name and questions on the question form inside your folders. The folders is at your seat, right? And after you put the question, you pass it to any of our helpers on both sides of the hall. So you can see helpers on both sides of the hall, right? Your question will be read out by the moderator. We'll try to address as many floor questions as possible during the two dialogue sessions, as well as the Q&A session toward the end of the symposium. So it's time to introduce our first speaker, as the seats are now ready. Our first speaker is Mr. John DALZELL. John is the Chief Executive of Waterfront Auckland. He is an experienced Chief Executive, Owner's Representative, and Project Directors. He was appointed as the Chief Executive of Auckland Waterfront Development Agency in November 2010, subsequently rebranded as Waterfront Auckland. Waterfront Auckland is a dedicated development agency responsible for around 45 hectares of waterfront properties for the residents of Auckland. It has two primary roles. Firstly, to plan, facilitate, and advocate the highest quality urban development outcomes in its area of influence. And secondly, to plan, manage, operate, and develop land, water, and other assets within its area. So, ladies and gentlemen, may I now invite John to the stage and to tell us how Auckland seizes the opportunities from challenges. Please, John.
Good morning, Financial Secretary, Secretary for Development, Harbourfront Commission and Chair. Greetings from Auckland, New Zealand. Kia ora. Auckland is otherwise known as Tamaki Makaurau, translated into our native tongue that broadly means the bride sought by many lovers. What I'm going to present to you this morning is a small part of Auckland's story. It's around how we've developed the city with the major events that we've been blessed with. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those opportunities and constraints, how we then went about leveraging the intergenerational benefits from these two events, talk a little bit about the prerequisites for success, the impact of a major event strategy that was developed in 2010, and then try and bring it all together at the end, leaving you with a small clip of Auckland on video. This is a shot of when we run the Rugby World Cup. Richie McCaw in the front with a cup over his head. It really embraced the empathy that New Zealanders have for sporting events. For some time leading up to that event and with events prior, we had been challenged with to what extent can this sporting event create intergenerational benefit for all Aucklanders, and also what must exist in terms of planning to create the greatest impact for the community. In terms of opportunities and constraints, I think it's important to acknowledge that Auckland and the water is a special place. Water is a defining force that fundamentally shapes the character of each place it touches. The urban waterfront is no exception. It is also important to acknowledge that waterfronts are a public place. They represent a convergence of different ideas, thoughts, and aspiration. Complexity arises not only from physical attributes, but also people's different views and the dynamic requirements for the use of spaces over time. It is fair to say, though, that major sporting events can act as a catalyst for activation. Major events especially are a fast, visible marketing vehicle that can make cities famous almost overnight, while directing money into the local economy. In terms of capturing and leveraging those events, though, there needs to be a very clear strategy around what constitutes a legacy. In relation to Auckland for the Rugby World Cup, we had a very clear view on the legacies that we wanted to create out of those sporting events. We wanted to make the most of Auckland's waterfront. We wanted to tell the world Auckland's story. We wanted to take pride in our place. We wanted to improve public transportation and making it a habit for Aucklanders to get engaged with their public transportation system. And we also wanted to position Auckland as a major events destination, celebrating not only the current Rugby World Cup, but also setting the scene for future events. In terms of those intergenerational benefits, when done well, waterfront redevelopment projects can be exciting and transforming. For Rugby World Cup, along the waterfront, a portion called Wynyard Quarter, as you see it, as it used to exist, was transformed literally overnight to this. Aucklanders woke up in August 2011 to find that their waterfront had been transformed. We had the benefit at that stage of largely flying underneath the radar screen. Today, this is a vibrant part of Auckland's waterfront, which Aucklanders are reconnecting with. There's a growing sense of pride and an acknowledgement that work along the waterfront can reconnect people. And by their very nature, these waterfronts must focus on the community that they serve. It started, perhaps, with the America's Cup around 2095 when we won it, around development in the viaduct, as you can see here, and also, importantly, Rugby World Cup in 2011. So perhaps let's pause for a minute and think about some of those prerequisites for success, because hosting a major sporting event on its own doesn't guarantee that the city can leverage and take advantage of the opportunity it's provided. There are some certain prerequisites for success, I would suggest. It's important, for example, that we lead with a strong vision. It is also then important, as we've mentioned, to identify the key legacy projects early and create a story around those. It is also important to focus on the people, and in doing so, emphasise a principle-based approach, and also to ensure that there is a strategic approach to the major events. Expanding a little bit on each of those. Leadership is important in anything we do. It's important that the key decision makers are assembled early and that there is an alignment of goals amongst those decision makers. It's also important to strategize. Agreeing priorities is a key part of making sure that when you deploy resources, there is a focus and clarity on the outcomes that must be achieved. In terms of building a strong vision, this clarity was represented in this vision around our Waterfront plan, a 30-year plan for the redevelopment of Auckland. And as you can see, it talks about destination, it talks about the Pacific culture, our maritime history, people, the character, activities, and very importantly, reconnecting the city and the sea. Articulating the vision when represented in a series of words is not always straightforward when dealing with differing peoples of the community. We found it very useful to articulate that vision with reference to other exemplars worldwide. And in fact, some of the best vision statements are made without drawing a line on the plan. Whilst you can learn from others, there has to be a sense of what creates your own unique identity. And for us, the very strong connection that we have with the water, the land, is embodied by many of the views and values represented by the people of the land, mana whenua, Tamaki Makaurau. This is a picture of their waka on the opening day of the Waterfront of Wynyard Quarter prior to the Rugby World Cup. It is also important that in terms of engaging with the community, that everyone gets on board early. We also have a broad outreach plan. A lot of people talk about consultation and engagement with the community, but I would suggest to you that in terms of developing a principles-based approach, one of the most fundamental tenets is that before consultation and engagement can occur, outreach must take place. Here there are 4 very simple strategies of how we have outreach to the community. The first involving a school program. The second involving a very simple notion of a piano placed in a public space, open for all to use. The other is growing plants and educating the community around the value of getting back in touch with nature and the ecology. And finally, the empathy for water. In terms of moving ahead and engaging with the public, it's important to identify early people that can empathise with all points of view. And if you're lucky, you might find those people in a constituency of the community who hold divergent views from your current direction. This photo here, some from a yachting fraternity may recognise Bruce Farr on the right. Most of you will not know who the person is on the left. The person on the left is a guy called Peter Walker, and he's had a profound impact on the Auckland community and Waterfront. Peter was one of the people very early on that I was able to have an emotional connection with around the importance of the waterfront and be able to turn that into a positive force in terms of communicating to a broader constituency the value of the plans and propositions that were in front of everyone. Partnership is very much about effective community participation. It should result between a partnership and collaboration involving the dynamic nature of the private sector, the stewardship of public entities, and the energy of the citizens. In terms of planning for success, the empathy around water is very important. Waterfront concepts and projects should flow from the nature of each place and embody its essential spirit. It should be remembered that every waterfront is part of a watershed containing creeks, rivers, estuaries, and bays. Waterfronts are also complex and unique places where land and water meet. They are a finite resource embodying a special history and character of each community. Urban waterfronts, like the city they help define, are dynamic places. To plan for such places, it's important to embrace an integrated approach. Waterfront planning should be long-range, comprehensive and holistic, and should encompass all relevant disciplines. It should use all appropriate technologies and encourage a system of sustainable growth and operation. In following these principles, we have in Auckland looked to a number of different attributes. Authenticity. The vision, concepts and proposals developed must convey a sense of community identity and reflect not only who we are, but who we want to become. We need to be bold in terms of what we do. We need to celebrate excellence. We don't need to be afraid of isolating people by not being able to pick winners. We need to constantly aspire for excellence across broad spectrums of planning, design, construction, placemaking and operations. I would suggest to you we should celebrate diversity. Aspire to achieve a broad range of diverse spaces that are flexible to accommodate a range of activities. People of all incomes and cultures should feel welcome. Nighttime activities as well as daytime activities should be encouraged, and distinctive places for children as well as the elderly should be included. We also need to seek a balance between financial, economic, social, cultural, and environmental contribution. In the long run, the balance must be viable and sustainable in a way that has a positive impact on the waterfront. Importantly, this must include a rich cultural experience which reflects the immediate needs and aspirations of the community. In Auckland in 2010, with the bringing together of the different councils, we had an opportunity to take a different approach to major events, and we developed a major event strategy that has helped define especially the Rugby World Cup. This event strategy has 4 major goals around economic growth, visitor growth, international exposure and livability. In doing so, we've been very focused on attracting events which are distinctively Auckland, are made in Auckland, and have the ability to leverage and align key industries and create legacies for the future. In our short history since the merger, we've hosted a number of events other than just the Rugby World Cup. For the 3-year period to 2012-2013, visitor night growth has more than quadrupled. Regional GDP impact over the same period has almost trebled. And we've hosted such notable events as the Rugby World Cup, the Volvo Ocean Race, the Rally of New Zealand, the International Triathlon World Championship, and also our own event around Pacifica. We've received some accolades for this, and now the world is starting to see Auckland in a different light. So to summarise, ensure that the prerequisites are in place. The event itself is not going to guarantee success. You should ensure that all of the prerequisites are in place. Remove any one element and you will reduce your chance of leveraging the event to create an enduring legacy. We have seen in Auckland, Wynyard Quarter help transform the waterfront overnight because of this attention to planning and detail over a period of the last 7 or so years. It's important in terms of having a goal to work to. A sporting event provides a deadline. It provides an opportunity to coalesce decision makers, galvanise action and to motivate the workforce. This is a picture of Jellicoe Street in Wynyard Quarter. This was finished at 3 a.m. on the morning where the Waka sailed through, 3 hours later at 6 a.m. The dedication of the workforce working around the clock was unprecedented in New Zealand and attributable to the Rugby World Cup deadline. It's also important to celebrate excellence in terms of ensuring that all stakeholders in the community fully understand and appreciate the benefits of a holistic and integrated approach. Be sure to use and celebrate your successes. You can see here that there's an aspect of celebrating not only the sporting success, but the success in the legacy projects created through good planning and the serendipitous event that was Rugby World Cup. When the event's over, there is a need to maintain momentum. This is a picture of Emirates Team New Zealand nosediving during the America's Cup sailed recently off San Francisco. This is a little bit like what we faced after the Rugby World Cup. Once the event is over, there is some legacy projects that require transition from an event overlay mode to business as usual. There's also a period of time and reflection where planning is considered for the next phase. My advice, and from experience, don't take too long in between breaths. Like we saw the Emirates Team New Zealand pick themselves up and go on. While they haven't been successful, they have been recognised this morning in Auckland in front of a crowd of around 10,000 people, because regardless of win or lose, the legacy out of the America's Cup for Auckland and New Zealand is about gaining greater profile for the marine expertise that enabled this magnificent boat to be presented and competitive on the world stage. It is also important to reflect on legacies created and acknowledge those who have gone before us to help enable the community to leverage the sporting opportunities. This is a picture of Sir Peter Blake, who won the America's Cup for New Zealand in 1995, and through his leadership and also the leadership of Sir Jock Hobbs around the Rugby World Cup, we have now created legacies in New Zealand which will be enduring for the community. And finally, it is important to share the learnings. This is a very important part, and I thank Nicholas Brooks for the opportunity to share with you this morning, and I'm sure that this will continue. Time spent up front creating a very clear strategy and creating community buy-in will be rewarded tenfold at the back end of the program. While it's important to have a very clear, defined strategy, it is also important that there is some flexibility in that strategy to evolve over the life of the project. Waterfront projects are very long-term, and it needs to be recognised that there needs to be room in the design framework for innovation to occur. So with that, I'd like to leave you a small snippet from Auckland and what a major sporting event has achieved for a small part of Auckland's waterfront. Thank you.
Shall we give a big hand to John? So thank you, John, you wake me up. And thanks for sharing all this learning. And that is a very truly inspiring story which we can learn from. And you tell us how you turn challenge to opportunities, how do you turn dream to reality. So we learn from you how you plan your waterfront that focus on people, how do you engage the community, and working in partnership with the citizen and the business community. Particularly interesting to me is the slide how land and water meet. You know, for those who know me, I have always been wondering why we have all this barrier like railing between the water and the land, right? So why can't we have staffs? And then these politicians and the legislator, president is here, and then someone tell me it's not a government who don't want any, who want to build a barrier, but it's the politician who want the barrier there because they are so afraid of people getting drowned in the water, or they just try killing themselves when they jump into the water. So I'm asking, who is responsible for the life of these people? Should it be their own self, or should the government be responsible for everyone who try to kill themselves into the water? So, and we can all see that all these water activities is important. Okay, so let's now travel from south to north across the Pacific Ocean and welcome our next speaker from Vancouver, Mr. Brian Jackson. Well, give me some time to introduce him. Yep. Brian is the General Manager of the Planning and Development Services of the City of Vancouver. He has been a practicing urban planner for 32 years, working in both the public and private sectors, and in 3 jurisdictions across North America. Brian has been the manager of Toronto's Waterfront in the Planning and Development Department for 7 years, and had overseen the high-density mixed-use redevelopment of the Toronto Waterfront. So Brian could certainly tell us how waterfront planning is related to Vancouver and Toronto top standing in international livability rankings. Without further ado, Brian, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, Mr. Financial Secretary, and Mr. Secretary for Development, members of the Harbour Commission, honored guests, and ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to take you on a journey to Vancouver. For those of you who don't know Vancouver, Vancouver is located on the west coast of Canada. Right now, in October, I refer to it as the wet coast of Canada. Vancouver has been named one of the most livable cities in the world every year for the past 10 years. Behind Melbourne, Australia, and somewhat inexplicably, Vienna, Austria. We score highly on livability, walkability, cyclability, sustainability, and multiculturalism. The rejuvenation of Vancouver's waterfront has certainly contributed to making Vancouver one of the most livable cities in the world. So I'm going to outline how did we get here, what has been achieved, and where do we go to from here. And I'm going to do it quickly because I hear in Hong Kong you like to do things very quickly. How did we get here? Well, like you and I, Vancouver started from humble beginnings as a forest. And I'm going to be talking to you about the rejuvenation of what's called False Creek. When Captain Vancouver sailed into Vancouver, he thought he had discovered a new river, but indeed it was just a bay, and that is called False Creek. From the humble beginnings of a logging town in the 1890s to an industrial city in the early 20th century, to a rail hub in the 1950s, to a series of development opportunities in the late 20th century. From an industrial rail yard in 1982 to a World Fair site in 1986. and finally to a master-planned mega project in 2013. In 50 short years, we have transformed the waterfront of the city of Vancouver. From a polluted shoreline to a complete community. From a boring skyline to one which complements the scenic beauty of Vancouver. So how did we get here? We were lucky enough to have two major catalysts to drive major changes in Vancouver over the last part of the 20th century and the first part of the 21st century. The first was the 1986 World Expo. The site for Expo was a large waterfront development area that was being underutilized at the time. The Expo site occupied prime waterfront land, and then after Expo, the land was sold to Li Ka-shing. You may know him. And many of the planning principles that have now developed in Vancouver resulted from the development of the Expo site. This is a map of the fair site. It was located on 70 acres. 55 countries participated. It was a Class II Bureau of International Expositions type of event. It went from May to October 1986 and luckily coincided with one of our best summers ever in terms of weather. And we had 22 million people come. A second major opportunity happened in 2010 when Vancouver and Whistler hosted the 2010 Winter Olympics. The Olympic site also allowed the city to explore new policies and to strive for even higher standards, and in particular apply the principles focused on sustainable design. The Winter Olympics opened in February of 2010, closed 16 days later, attracted 1.8 million people to Vancouver and 82 participating countries. So what have we achieved? I want to review the planning decisions made and some of the specific practices and planning principles that we follow. An area has been reborn. The 1986 World Expo site and the 2010 Winter Olympics were life givers to a new planning area known as East False Creek. There are 4 planning areas that we've been working on over the decades. The population has grown from 0 in 1991 to approximately 20,000 today and is projected to grow to 40,000 by the time of build-out. We've been building for the future in introducing sustainable energy production policies. We're requiring sustainable energy, a neighborhood energy utility system, providing space, heating, and hot water to new buildings in the area, including the Olympic Village. It is sticky. We are requiring green roofs now on the top of our high-rise and mid-rise buildings. We've so far, in this particular area, in the former Olympic Village, have 11,000 square meters of green roof on top of the residential buildings. And we require, as part of our development, the developers, including the city in this case, to restore habitat for both fish and birds. And this is an example of an island that has been created for new habitat. We, of course, require new public art installations and historic buildings to be preserved. So what else have we achieved? A celebration of space. Excellence in new public spaces, both as large spaces and small. And we are building complete communities. We are building, along with the residential development, parks, recreation centers, childcares, and libraries, as well as a 22-kilometer-long oceanfront promenade for walking, jogging, and cycling along the shoreline of interconnected parks and public spaces. Often these amenities are built right into the podiums of development with a high density of residential uses above. These social amenities are essential supporting infrastructure for communities, what sociologists call third places. These are places which, after people live and work, where people gather and interact, where society happens. Vancouver has found a balance. In other words, there is a balance between what it needs to achieve and what it wants to achieve. The outcomes speak for themselves. Qualitatively, there is recognition that Vancouver is a very livable city. Quantitatively, the indicators are truly remarkable. Between 1996 and 2011, there's been a population in the downtown, an increase of 75%. There's also been an increase in the number of jobs by 26%. But the number of vehicles entering the downtown has dropped by 25%. These outcomes are rather obvious for both the livability and for the environment. Many of these outcomes came to fruition out of the planning and development policies following Expo 86 as well as the Olympics. So where do we go from here? We're projecting a population increase going from 20,000 to 40,000 in this area, with the remaining properties being quickly developed, as you'll see in a minute. We're proposing that the number of dwelling units in the area also will double to approximately 26,000. We will continue to build on our legacy of complete communities by ensuring that development provides affordable housing, market rental housing, new parks, new libraries, new daycares, and other civic amenities as development occurs. From big ideas like taking down a freeway that doesn't carry the traffic that it was designed to carry, to individual applications that are going through the approval and construction process right now. This is a particularly interesting one that every city is currently grappling with. It's our new casino, the downtown casino, replacing our existing temporary casino in our downtown. We anticipate several hundred people coming to our public hearing to voice their concern about the controversy associated with a new downtown casino. To more rental housing built almost on top of our stadiums. And there is more coming. These are all applications which we are driving to create better architecture and require more community benefits, such as outdoor recreation space, indoor recreation space, new childcare spaces, upgrades to existing parks and open space. Development is continuing with new homes for people to live in, with cultural amenities like new theaters built into the base of new buildings, to new market rental buildings, to affordable housing projects that are partially funded by the city and developers in moving forward. We're continuing to grow and build complete communities. In Vancouver, we seek balance. It's a balance of community interests, development opportunities, and public benefits, continuing the legacy of excellent city building which started with Expo 86 and the 2010 Olympics. The only words I know to describe Vancouver, ding gua gua. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian, for your Ding Gua Gua presentation. So you have shown us the experience of the Falls Creek Waterfront. And in hearing your presentation, I hear a recurring keyword, livability, right? So I think the waterfront has played a very important part in enhancing livability for a city. And I also hear other words like walkability and cyclability. So I'm just wondering, for all participants here and our guests, to let us know how wide do we need to have to enable pedestrian, people, bicycle, or people walking with a dog, or dog themselves. Will they be on separate lanes, or they can share space, right? Or if they don't share space, how wide the waterfront would we need? And then, so there's something that will be interesting to me as I am, practicing as an architect who always get difficulties in handling complaints like, some dogs are in the way of the people pass and some cycling are in conflict with the walking pedestrian. And some running pedestrians are actually blocking the way of the walking pedestrian. And the walking pedestrian complained that the running pedestrian was walking too fast. And I don't know whether we need a slow lane and a fast lane for the Harbourfront, for people walking, right? So I'm sure that you will all agree that, planning is not just drawing grids on the map, but the key to get things right from the beginning. Let's bring the two speakers together for a chat and see how their experience could shed some light on our Harbourfront planning in Hong Kong. May I now also invite Mr. John DALZELL to come on stage. And also invite our chairman, Mr. Nicholas Brooke, to convene this dialogue session. Nick has been heavily involved in Harbourfront matters since the HEC era in 2004, and he has been appointed as chairman of the Harbourfront Commission since 2010. So, gentlemen, as you are all ready, and Nick, so I'll pass the stage over to you.
Thank you, Vincent. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. John and Brian, first of all, can I, on behalf of the Commission, thank you both very much for journeying to Hong Kong and for sharing your experiences with us, particularly in terms of developing your waterfront for the people. And this is a key theme that we are adopting here in Hong Kong. It's all about getting the people to the water and the water to the people. So that's very much primary one of our aims. Just a couple of comments, and then I'll ask you, if you could, to share some of your thoughts with us. Both of you rank in the top 10 in terms of livable cities, and clearly your waterfront has had a major impact on that ranking and will continue to do so. So a lesson there, I think, also for Hong Kong. You may also have noticed from the Secretary of Development's earlier presentation that both the past of Hong Kong, indeed the future, is linked to our harbour and our waterfronts, and just as it is in your cities. So similarities, I think, there. And the challenge we're now facing, I think, is how to press ahead with harbourfront enhancement in a holistic and innovative manner, and to adopt, as you heard, a more flexible, if you like, management approach going forward. And certainly, we have a great deal to learn from your experiences, and you've set the bar very high, both of you. Thank you for what we're hoping to achieve. Maybe just starting on engagement, outreaching to the community. We're about to embark on a journey, as you've heard today, a journey with which you're very familiar. You both embarked on that journey and achieved success. I mean, as we embark on that journey, advice and suggestions to the Commission as to what we need to really think about and take into account. I picked up particularly, your comment about creating a legacy for the future and also creating that unique identity. Statements which ring very, very true to me. So just both of you, if you could, just perhaps share thoughts in terms of priorities and indeed pitfalls as we try and take this initiative forward. I mean, just specifically, both of you mentioned the waterfront planning should focus on people, and we couldn't agree more on that, and that it should also fulfill the needs and demands of the community. The community need to be respected in the exercise. In reality, I think so far as Hong Kong is concerned, one of the key problems we're tackling at the moment is ascertaining exactly what the community aspire for. And Brian, you've been involved in both Toronto and Vancouver in this process. What sort of processes did you adopt in ascertaining the community priorities? And particularly in establishing those planning principles that you mentioned, Brian? I think those are very interesting, and be interested to know how you established those planning principles and to what extent the community was involved. And then John, you mentioned outreach through placemaking initiatives particularly. How does that work in practice, and how do you analyze and summarize the views collected? And particularly, if there's a split of views, if there are diverse views, how do you actually come to that final decision? So Brian, maybe if you could comment and react. Start, thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to start, I think, by talking about public consultation. This is an age of requiring instant messaging and instant communication. And it is so important that the communication strategy, the consultation strategy that is adopted for the Harbour Commission in moving forward really is able to use formal and informal ways of communicating with people and also hearing those messages back. That the traditional form of consultation, such as just going out to an open house or having small meetings, doesn't work. You really have to reach out through social media and engage people early on in the process. You then have to check back with them to make sure that you're getting it right before you then launch into the final plans. It is so important when you go out in those initial consultations to make sure that you don't come in with every T crossed and I dotted, that you come in with broad concepts so that when you go back and check back with people at the middle of a consultation process, that those people feel like their ideas have been listened to, and then they're starting to see the changes on the drawings, the lines on the map that Vincent was talking about, and their ideas, their concepts incorporated. Then they'll feel a buy-in into the moving forward for the plan.
Would you like just to comment on the planning principles that you shared with us, that you've managed to establish for your waterfront?
The planning principles for any major community now, I think, have to be based on sustainability. But most people think of sustainability only as environmental sustainability. It is also about economic sustainability. It has to be an economic model that does not require governments to keep putting money in to sustain. It has to be economically viable, and it has to be socially sustainable. So our principles are based on those three legs of a stool of sustainability. Social sustainability has to make sure that the community services and facilities are there as development occurs. You have to make sure that as new residential development occurs, that you have places for the children to play, you have places for the teenagers to go and keep out of trouble, and that you have places for the seniors to go and relax in a safe environment. You have to do that at the same time. So the principles that have evolved in our waterfront development follow from those three legs of a stool of sustainability.
And did you engage with the community on those principles? Absolutely.
The public was involved and continue to be involved on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis. In a plan that we're moving forward for another part of our downtown, we had over a year and a half, 140 different opportunities for the public to comment. That's almost an event every week and a half. And of a community of about 40,000, we estimated about 7,000 people participated in one form or another in those consultations. But again, you have to reach out into all the different methods. We had what we call walk shops, where we took people in groups of 25 to 50 and we actually walked the area, stopped, and instead of a static workshop, we actually walked the areas and got people's idea on the move. And then we had small focus groups, and we had design charrettes, and we had the typical open houses. So we looked at a range of public consultation.
John, your thoughts?
Yes, I think just picking up on those themes, early involvement is absolutely critical. It must be continuous, and that's the bit that's not always so easy. And then the final part for me, which is the hardest, is actually to establish an emotional connection between the community and the outcome sought. And that's sort of is difficult to convey, but perhaps I can give you a little story around the design of the Wynyard Quarter and the Jellicoe Street that I had in some of my images. For us, as New Zealanders down the bottom of the earth and the next stop being the South Pole, we're not as sophisticated as our Northern American colleagues when it comes to consultation. So we've had to work hard on this. But one thing that we did learn early on from Perry Lethlean in Melbourne, Australia, was the use of the exemplars around to communicate and demonstrate to the community what the outcomes are that were sought. Because it's very easy to have the vision written in words, but what we found was that when we actually went through some of those charrettes and community meetings, those words meant something different to virtually every person. And it was only when we started to communicate visually, showing drawings. One good thing about Kiwis is we love to travel, so everyone's got the favourite place around the world where they've been. So we used that to our advantage with the community, with our councillors, and we actually got them to engage with us. So if they liked a certain promenade in Nice, then we would have that as an exemplar. And we would start to then, for the more analytical, we would start to look at some of those key dimensions and what the physical attributes were that made that such a successful promenade. And so by the time that we'd got through that process, when we had started to conceptually draw lines on a plan, whenever there was an objection raised around, well, I don't quite like that, we could always relate the objection back to one of the principles that came out of the analysis of those exemplars. So in that way, that's how we sought to establish an emotional connection between the outcome and the individual.
Interesting, when we were talking earlier, you used the word outreach quite deliberately. Perhaps you might like to just elaborate a bit on that.
Yes, well, certainly in our learning process, we had a consultation process set down in the statutory requirements. And we felt that was quite mechanical and didn't necessarily achieve that emotional connection with the community. So we started to talk about, as a first base, if you can take the American analogy of baseball, first base being outreach. So that the principle was that you actually had to do something for the community without expecting anything back from them to start with. And we've demonstrated that. You can demonstrate that very simply. We've got a program with schools of educating the school children, running holiday programs. And that starts to provide a constituency of support and another communication channel to tap into the community. Because as Brian said, in this day and age, you need to be constantly looking for different ways of engaging with the community. And for the younger people, they will need to be hooked into the social media. But for the older people, perhaps that's not so relevant. So it's very much about taking the message and then customising the message to the audience. And when you can do that, then you can perhaps get into the next stage, or base 2, where you start to get into that two-way conversation occurring. And then once that's achieved, then you can really start to evaluate some of the plans, some of the preferences, at all times keeping in front of you what the vision is and what the outcomes are sought.
Thank you. Perhaps just shifting topic slightly, you'll have heard earlier that the view of the Commission is that we need, in terms of delivering outcomes, we need to create an agency, an authority, a dedicated authority. Now, interested to tap both of you on your thoughts on that. I mean, John, you have the I think it's called Waterfront Auckland, which is a council, I believe, controlled by the City Council. And that leads the strategic direction, I think, of what happens on the waterfront. And interested to hear thoughts as to why Auckland chose this particular model. Obviously, we're looking at a Hong Kong tailored model, but be interested to hear about the Auckland model and why you thought this Auckland model was the most appropriate in your case. And then Brian, in the case of Vancouver, I see that the planning implementation of the waterfront development is part of the city's responsibility. But even without a dedicated agency, you've managed clearly to do a very good job, as you've shown us today. And what are the key factors that made you decide, if you like, or left things in-house rather than led to creation of a dedicated agency? I think, again, we'd be interested to hear the Vancouver story, if you could. So, John, first, please. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, look, there are many different models of how you might go about regenerating urban land, waterfront land. I think it comes down to the local community finding a model that is going to work for you, and that is something only you can decide on. I can, however, give you some of our experiences and perhaps highlight some of the things that we have acknowledged have worked well and other things that haven't worked so well. And I've also had the benefit of being involved for, this is my 8th year on the waterfront, and worked under two quite different development models. The first was a very small and focused model, which had a board of competency-based directors around urban regeneration. And that worked very well in terms of, for Rugby World Cup, producing an outcome around Wynyard Quarter. And the things that worked well there was we had essentially almost 100% control, apart from regulatory involvement, in the delivery of a very defined area of the waterfront. Contrast that to what we have now, where the agency has grown significantly, has a much wider scope, but has a board which is, while it has a level of competency around planning, doesn't have the same depth of experience in terms of some of those quite specialist skills. But on the positive side, is much more broadly aligned with the community. So quite a different model. I guess the downside of the current model is that some of the major transport planning functions, the economic functions, event hosting, etc., is actually not part of our immediate mandate. So while we can collaborate, we're not the lead agency. So it's all about looking at what outcomes that you need and want to achieve, and then trying to find the model that works best for you. So unfortunately, there's no magic answer, but there's certainly some lessons to be learned from ours and other models around the world.
Brian, your thoughts?
First of all, Vancouver is a much smaller jurisdiction than Hong Kong, both in terms of population and the complexity of the land use issues. We do have a port authority. The port authority only deals with the movement of goods and services to and from the port. They own their own land. It's a federal crown corporation. They do their own planning. We do the balance of the planning for all the lands that aren't controlled by the port. For Vancouver, that model has worked very well. In Toronto, where they do have a harbour commission, the issues are much more complex because they have interdisciplinary and intergovernmental jurisdictions which are highly complex and, dare I say, competitive. And when you have a situation like that, it is very useful to have one agency that can bring together all the different agencies in order to get things done as the central clearinghouse for movement when you want to make a major shift in either things like public access or there's a sale of property on the waterfront. It can be a very, very useful tool as a clearinghouse for discussion and action.
Well, that's very much one of the drivers here, the need for a central clearinghouse. Just one final point, because I'm told we're tight on time. In terms of Q&A, the idea now, I gather, is that we'll have all four speakers come on stage later in the proceedings, and you'll have a chance to do Q&A with all four speakers. But just one final point I'd like to tax you both on, if I may, and that's land-water interface. And you pick this up, and it's something that we struggle with here to some extent. We focus a lot on land. We don't perhaps focus enough on what happens on water, and there's this interconnection, obviously, between land and water. I think fair to say here certain jealousies over who has use of the water. Private marinas, I think, in the harbour might create certain tensions, if you like. Public facilities, I don't see necessarily a problem. Are there issues around land-water interface that you've had to deal with?
In short, yes. I think we are always challenged with our waterfront is not so long compared to perhaps some of the other international cities, and we also have a port that still occupies a majority of one portion, or the eastern portion of our waterfront. So that is the discussion. Like you, there is much. We're still very much having the discussion about, is further reclamation required at the port. I would actually like to get it to a position where you guys are in acknowledging that should not occur. So one of the strategies that we developed very early on was recognising that people did have this inherent need to get down and touch the water. And a lot of our waterfront prior to the redevelopment was characterised by wharves. So there was no real opportunity for people to get down and actually swim or just put their feet in the water at lunchtime. So we've created opportunity for that to occur, and that has been some of the most successful reconnection of people with land and water.
Brian?
The answer for me goes back to the word that I use a lot in planning, and that's balance.
Mm-hmm.
It's balancing the recreational boating needs, the port-related needs, as well as what John was talking about, the need for people to be able to actually touch the water and go into it. Right. And any plan that we develop has to balance all of those needs. And recognizing that no one group is dominant, we try and work with all of them to at least listen to the others' opinions and moving forward. The other issue that we have, quite frankly, in Vancouver is accommodating the huge demand for dragon boats. So we've got a fourth contingent that we have to deal with as well.
Yeah, okay, good. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry. I think I'm going to have to draw this dialogue to a close. But thank you both for sharing with us. Thank you both for bringing your experience to bear. You're going to have to be on parade again later, I gather, for another Q&A session, so be prepared. But thank you both very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you.